playground in the world, and it was 50 metres from my back door. Now I have to say, my mother was not a fan of this adventure playground. But to me, it was a paradise. A paradise made up of coal tailings momentously high, rolling black hills of coal waste, and deep black dark crevices where one might get lost playing hide and seek. It was the perfect playground. Why wouldn't I love it? My mother's dire warnings fell on deaf ears. I grew up in a coal mining village, and those coal tailings held no dangers for me. I remember my mother saying, if they dig one more hole in the ground, the whole of Wales will collapse like a pack of cards. You mark my words. I didn't mark her words. I was on those coal tips any chance I got. I remember one day looking down the precipice of one of those huge coal tips, a piece of rubber conveyor belt grasped in my hands as I calculated my trajectory down. I had something to prove to my two best friends, boys, that I could be just as good as them. So I lowered myself down and pushed off. Over those crusty surfaces I went, to the right, to the left. I nearly made it to the bottom when a hole came out of nowhere, threw me off my perch on my rear end. My pride was hurt, and I had a 2-inch nail embedded. I still have the scar. But I saw the admiration in those boys' eyes. I had conquered the coal tips. Not 10 miles away from my village, another village, nearly identical. Same coal tips, same school, village. But something was about to happen to those children's paradise that would change our lives forever. An eyewitness saw what happened one morning. It was the last day of term. The school had just had their morning assembly. The children had sung the last song they would ever sing, All Things Bright and Beautiful. The eyewitness said that as he walked to work that morning and looked up at one of those coal tips, it seemed to him that the side seemed capsized in on itself, and from out of that gigantic hole rose a wave of wet, black sludge that seemed to hover for a moment over the village before it roared down that mountainside. It smashed into a row of terraced houses and completely obliterated the primary school. 144 children, people died that day, 116 young children. An inquiry was started up, and guess what? The National Coal Board had known all along for decades that they were tipping that waste on a natural spring. The government did nothing. No one was ever prosecuted, and when funds were raised for the families of the victims, the families received £50 each. Put yourself in those parents' shoes. The injustice. £50 was all those children were worth. Some years ago, I went and visited the village of Aberfan. A memorial garden now occupies the old school site, and I meandered along those graves, reading the names of those children, and amazingly enough, came across the gardener, who was one of the very few survivors from that school. And he told me what it had been like growing up in that silent, traumatized village. No friends. All those years later, he had tears in his eyes when he said to me, "The least I can do is tend their graves." I sat in that memorial garden that afternoon, and I remembered my childhood, my adventure playground, that paradise that I loved so much. And then I thought of that morning, and I pictured those children in that schoolyard, and I pictured that terrible time when all that sludge, 60,000 tons of it, had descended upon them and settled 12 metres deep. I seemed to hear the children singing, and I heard my mother's voice saying, "You mark my words, it'll all collapse one day." 50 years later, I'm living on the other side of the world. But then, I was less than 10 miles away. Identical school. That could have been me. Children lost. A disaster waiting to happen that was known to the government authorities and known to the National Coal Board. Yes, our paradise was lost that day. Those children's paradise was lost that day. But Aberfan village, that village, lost all its children.